Welcome to the Best Practices for Youth Engagement webinar. My name is Serena Lewin. I'm one of the workshops and education coordinators at GreenThumb, the division of the NYC Parks Department that works with community gardens across the city. Tonight, Elena is going to be our Q&A host and our tech support, and our moderator is going to be Lila Elman. So I'm going to pass it to her. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so happy to see so many faces joining us this evening from all around the city and all around the world, perhaps. I am GreenThumb's Youth Engagement Coordinator, and I'm joining you from Brooklyn tonight. I'm also a community gardener at 615 Green, and I love to grow carrots with my kids. We are very lucky today to be joined by Maureen Connolly, who is a consultant with CVK Associates. This is the organization that partners with NYC Service to support youth leadership councils. And she's been focused particularly on integrating service learning across the curriculum, understanding reflection, and meeting common core standards through a service learning lens. She's also professor of education at the College of New Jersey. And in her personal life, she and I are both mothers and stepmothers, but she, in addition, is a runner and a yogi who is good at growing basil. I am going to turn the mic over to Maureen now to lead you in an exercise that you might want to consider doing with youth in the garden before you kicked off whatever activity you planned with them.
All right. Welcome, everyone. It's so nice to be here this evening with you. What we're going to do is we're just going to come together as community, and collectively we're going to do some box breathing. So I will count us down. I'll 3, 2, 1 count down. I will count up and inhale, counting in my head as I inhale. We'll hold the breath, and then we'll exhale together. And we'll do that a few times just to get comfortable in this space, this virtual space together. So if I know I need to do this, if you need to roll out your shoulders, roll out your neck, wherever you're holding that tension right now, just give yourselves a moment. I usually say to people when I lead this, if you're comfortable closing your eyes, that's great. Another way to go is simply to look about 45 degrees in front of you. So whatever feels the most comfortable for you. And I will count us down. 3, 2, 1, breathe in. Hold. And breathe out. That's a little slower than the breaths we might take throughout the day. So let's try that again. 3, 2, 1, breathe in. Hold. And breathe out. We're going to do that one more time. This time when you breathe in, let's breathe in some evening energy, some excitement about what we're going to learn. And let's try to breathe out some of that stress of the day. So that big inhale that we'll take at the start, let's see if we can get our belly buttons to kind of pop out, really push in that air. And when we breathe out that stress, let's really breathe it out. Exhale all you've got. So 3, 2, 1, breathe in. Hold. And breathe out. And we can come back, open your eyes, come back to this shared space. And I'll just tell you a little bit about doing this. And I'm so happy I'm seeing, I needed that in the chat. So, right, we just run from thing to thing to thing. The other night, my husband, we are like, I'm going to show my age. If you ever watch that show, Dharma and Greg, that's us. Like he's like business guy, do. And I want to, do some deep breathing, but we're both pretty type A at the same time and doing a lot of stuff, right? We're always on the move. The other night I was sitting down, I'm like, I'm just so stressed. I'm not even able to just sit down and relax. He goes, do you want to breathe? So it's definitely something that I've clearly been modeling in my own life, even outside of this professional space. And I will say to you that it's a little funky sometimes, especially doing this with youth. It's not necessarily what they're used to doing. And I like to tell the college students that I teach, when I first do this with them, I'll tell them, listen, I get rooms full of New York City police officers to do this. Like, you can do this. You can, come out of your comfort zone a little bit. And I'll also share that I've had students midway through the semester when I don't see them as often. I have a front-loaded course in my semester that I do this in, and they'll say, one of the things I miss the most is just coming together and doing that breathing. They don't take breaks, right? So think about ways, whether it's leading breathing like this or other, ways that you want to just have a tradition of, here's how we come together. Here's how we let go of everything else and really come together in what we're doing in this time that we're going to be together. Another way that you can do that is to just have a check-in, to just find ways to get a sense of how the youth that you're working with are doing. So we're going to do a little check-in here. It's fun. It's fun to do this, I think, as a metaphor. So I will do a metaphorical check-in about your personal weather report. So I can share with you, my personal weather report right now is kind of like the weather we're having. It's, sunny, warm, lovely, but I know that there's a storm a-coming because I've got a lot of papers coming in to grade, and that's just going to dampen my mood. So that would be my weather report, sunny with some incoming storm. And if you would, in the chat, let's hear a couple of weather reports from everyone who's here and attending. Hopefully we'll see them pop into that chat. Yay, thank you. Lana's telling us she's sunny with a chance of rain, a little overcast. Happy to be here. Hey, there we go. Great. So thank you. And you can thank some blustery winds. Oh boy. Hurricane vibes. Stephanie, we need to talk. Oh my goodness. All right. I am loving this. All right. So Jerry, we've got to check in with you. See, we're a little cloudy. Just these fun little ways where we can get a sense of what's going on, but keep it light. And then maybe open the door for checking in individually with some of the youth that we might want to do that with later on in the time that we're together. So that's just a model to get us started. And we might make excuses for dancing in the rain. I love this. All right. I'm going to keep us going though and say, toss it back to Lila to share a little bit just about these organizations and community agreements. I'm so sorry. I will do that too. So I'm distracted because I'm looking at all these weather reports that are fantastic. And thank you so much for sharing. Another thing that you may want to do when you're getting together with youth is to come up with some group agreements, to think about how you want to make sure that you spend time together that is meaningful, that is positive. So for our time together tonight, we've got a few group agreements. We are inviting you all to please honor our multiple identities. Remember that we come to this work with very different backgrounds and experiences. And so if you hear something and you're thinking, I don't really like that very much, take a moment, see if you can consider where that information is coming from, why it might rub you the wrong way. And let's try to honor that we are coming from different places and try to be curious about that. This connects really nicely, I think, to being present, to being open to learning. I know it's the end of a long day, but thank you. You've made the choice to be here, which is amazing. And so let's make the most of it. Let's really take in as much as we can. We've also got step up and step back. So this is kind of connects with one of my favorite acronyms, which is WAIT. Why am I talking, or why ain't I talking? And that's where we just ask people to, jump in and share some of your own experiences. There are going to be lots of opportunities. You'll see this icon in the chat, calling for you to share in the chat. So please make this as interactive as we can, and contribute ideas there. And if you're a person who's contributing and contributing and contributing, we say thank you. We also ask that you, encourage others to join in. I think that's really important, especially when we're in person. Next, we have ask for literacy moments. This is when I think it's just a really sophisticated way of saying, hey, I don't know. And I love that. I'll say that to my own students. Hey, I'm in a literacy moment. It's a lot easier to say than, guess what, I don't know, right? And then finally, we ask that we all take a moment to acknowledge intent as distinct from impact. And I always joke that this is what could save any relationship, right? If we could really just step back and understand that we may have all the best intentions, but if our impact is negative, it doesn't change the fact that our impact is negative, and we need to own both sides of things. So if I'm coming up to give you a nice big hug and I step on your toe, I need to acknowledge that the impact was still that I stepped on your toe, even if my intention was a loving one to give you that nice big hug. So these are some community agreements that we're hoping everybody will be good with tonight. And we're wondering if any of you have been creating community agreements with the work you're doing with youth. And if you have been, this is a great time to share that in the chat. So we'll pause for a sec, see if anything comes up, anything you'd like to add, even for this evening. Always good to see. I think for the sake of time, we could probably keep rolling and see if anything comes in. Be respectful. Great, Lila, thank you.
So you're going to see this chat icon a lot tonight. Share your ideas in the chat. And this is because even though we're such a large group, it doesn't lend itself to having a back and forth discussion. I want to try to create that exchange, and also humbly acknowledge that GreenThumb does not have all the answers. I'm going to be speaking tonight about GreenThumb's current program for engaging youth, but I recognize it is far from the only model for working with youth. And many of you out there are already doing work with youth in a variety of ways. And I want everyone to learn from your lessons and your experiences. So if something I say resonates, build on it. If you disagree with something I say, call me out, share your experiences, and hopefully tonight can be just the start of this exchange of ideas for engaging youth in the garden, and we can continue it afterwards on Slack. We've set up a channel for youth engagement, and as well in person at our conference in April. So briefly, our agenda is going to be an overview of GreenThumb's youth program and discussing an evaluation that we had last year and the results from those surveys, and then growing from what we've learned from that evaluation, what we can do to improve our strategies with engaging youth moving forward. and then taking some time to reflect and answering questions from the audience. I'm not going to read GreenThumb's mission verbatim, but here it is. As you know, we are here to support volunteer community gardeners like yourself with free access to land, materials, and workshops like this one. And we're committed to cultivating the next generation of community gardeners through GreenThumb's Youth Leadership Council, called YLC for short. And the Youth Leadership Councils grew out of a partnership with NYC Service Bureau. NYC Service is a government division of the mayor's office. It's focused on volunteerism and service programs. And I'm going to turn it over to Maureen now to tell us why they created the YLCs.
I was muted, apologies. Thanks, Lila. So NYC Service has over 100 youth leadership councils throughout the city with the aim of increasing volunteerism and amplifying youth voice. And you can see the mission and vision here on this slide, that we want equitable access to transformative civic opportunities for all NYC high school youth. And we want every NYC high school student to be equipped with the skills, support, and resources needed to build stronger communities and an inclusive city. And I really would stress, obviously, both the mission and vision are so important. I do think that concept of skills, of really helping youth develop the skills to be change makers, is so, so important as we think about our work with youth and in leadership during this evening.
So as Maureen mentioned, the target for the Youth Leadership Councils is high school students. So when I say youth throughout tonight's presentation, I'm speaking about those teenagers, but obviously a lot of what we'll discuss can be applied to younger children as well. The Youth Leadership Council at GreenThumb began partnering with NYC Service in 2014, and since then we've engaged 580 youth, ages 14 to 21. We've had 80 gardener facilitators and logged over 12,000 hours of community service. Through this hands-on experience at community gardens, youth are learning about horticulture, carpentry, composting, food justice, and perhaps even more importantly, they are developing their teamwork and leadership skills that will serve them in life beyond the garden as well. Currently this year, we are supporting 12 gardens through the YLCs. And as you know, there are over 500 gardens in New York City. So we need everyone working with youth in whatever partnerships and ways they can. Last year during the pandemic, our programs were on pause, which gave us the opportunity to have an AmeriCorps volunteer conduct an evaluation of the first 6 years of the program. They conducted surveys, they looked at previous documentation, they got an overall picture of what was working well and what can be improved, so we can make some recommendations for the next cycle, which is hopefully launching as we speak. I want to share with you the first finding from the gardener's perspective of why they wanted to host youth in the garden. And the priorities that were most commonly listed are the larger circles you see. So their highest priority was to pass on knowledge to the next generation about how to care for community gardens. But they also wanted to empower youth to make decisions. And this feeds directly into leadership development skills. They also expressed the need to expose youth to the power of community. And lastly, but not surprisingly, sometimes they just needed extra hands in the garden. They also expressed that it was very important to them to learn how youth think and feel. So they were constantly asking questions about what youth see in the garden and encouraging them to do research and share their thoughts and their perspective to others in the group. So really amplifying youth's voices. Next, I want to share with you the youth's perspective, a few quotes on what they found to be most memorable and enjoyable about working in community gardens. Harvesting the crops, being given the chance to taste the delicious things, interacting with different community garden members, talking to them about their experiences and backgrounds, and enjoying how helpful people were in teaching them. Also giving them space to be creative and have choice, which made it a more fun experience. So clearly from the youth's perspective, this was a worthwhile endeavor. And now I will share with you what the gardeners identified as some of the most beneficial activities that they did with youth. They really appreciated having youth help them build, fill, and plant in raised beds. They were very grateful for help weeding. That came up a lot. It's a large task, as any garden knows. But most importantly, they enjoyed that the youth could learn through gardening how much of an impact they were making themselves as leaders within their peer group and a positive impact on the environment. So we should definitely keep engaging youth and moving forward. Now I'm going to dive into growing from what we learned, focusing on some of the challenges that you may be able to relate to. Right from the get-go, recruiting, sustaining attendance of youth could be challenging. Sometimes there was low attendance. Gardeners spent a lot of time preparing for a workday, only to have a low turnout. So what we can do to address this is better communication. Figure out what works best for youth. Many youth are not checking email, but they do read their texts right away. So gardeners have told me some of the most effective things to do right from the get-go is set up a chat group through text messaging and make sure you chat with those, send those youth a method, text them the night before a service day, text them the morning of the service day, make sure they're awake. Also, make sure you recruit locally. Sometimes low attendance was due to the fact that you had very eager, environmentally committed youth that lived far away from the garden. And even though they were interested in the service work, commuting was a barrier, especially on weekends. So find out what schools are closest to you. Most youth found out about our YLC program through their school and try to really build up those connections within your community. So transportation or having the money to pay for a Metro card isn't a barrier to participating in your program. Also, encourage peers that are showing up, even if you just start with a couple, to recruit their peers. Tell them next time you come, I want you to bring a sibling, a cousin, a friend, a neighbor to check out what we're doing. They're the best recruiters. They'll trust what their friends say over an adult any day. Be sure you also show gratitude for the hard work. Text them right afterwards. Thank you so much, what you're grateful for. That kind of appreciation goes a long way with anyone to keep them coming back. And then finally, the end goal is to continue their relationship with the garden and have them be the future of community garden membership. Consider lowering the minimum age of your group's bylaws for becoming a full member of the garden, or maybe you want to create a junior garden membership so that they really feel investment and ownership in your space. The next challenge we heard, particularly from the youth, was working conditions. It was difficult to deal with very hot days in direct sunlight with lots of insect bites, and it was a struggle to stay cool and hydrated. We want youth to be physically comfortable in the garden. That's going to affect their mood and everything about their experience. So firstly, make sure they're prepared with appropriate dress. They've got their hat, they've got their sunglasses. Make sure you have bug spray and sunscreen on hand to share if you haven't brought their own. Make sure they've got water bottles. Also, keep a flexible schedule. Avoid working in the heat of the day. If you can, schedule your time with them in the early mornings, in the later afternoons. Also take frequent breaks when it's a hot day. Vary the activities. So sometimes hopefully you have some shade in your garden. If not, vary the activities with things that are less strenuous, talking lessons, things that can be done, with less strain, less physical strain. And lastly, there's nothing like a snack to keep everyone's energy up and motivate you. So this quote highlights a bit of a disconnect between what gardeners found most helpful and what youth reported in surveys to be least enjoyable. Pulling weeds was definitely least enjoyable. However, it was still satisfying and nice to see the result afterwards of where we were able to have a nice clean space that was weed-free. So be frank with youth that there are tasks that are not as enjoyable as others, but stress to them how important and critical they are. Some of these activities are crucial, but what you can do to make them more pleasant is give 2 or 3 tasks for activities that youth have choice to alternate the order they want to do in. Let them motivate each other to get through the hard parts by taking turns and using teamwork. Emphasize, being each other's cheerleader. Take time to step back and look at the progress you're making. They can take before and after pictures and really celebrate their accomplishments. And that is going to help make the hard work all the more worth doing. I'm getting distracted because I'm seeing great feedback in the chats about apps to use to help people feel comfortable, and ways that parents can also keep an eye on communication. So I'm happy to see those ideas flowing. Now that we've dealt with getting youth to feel physically comfortable in the garden, I want to address the challenges relating to knowledge and getting mentally comfortable with the garden space. You want to begin any program with an orientation to the space they're in. Don't assume that youth know anything about how this community garden came to be, or that it's run by a volunteer group and its relationship to Green Thumb. They may think, oh, it's a public park and maybe someone's paid to maintain it. No assumptions. Start with a history of the land, a history of how the garden came to be, and get them oriented to the space. Some gardeners said that it's important to make sure that they not only feel comfortable, that they feel comfortable leading youth and not just instructing how to do chores. and that they may need more resources such as a garden-based curriculum. So one thing we can do, there are many curriculums already out there that are free that we can access, but Green Thumb is going to begin a process, sort of a literature review of them, and try to consolidate and make some recommendations specifically for community gardens working with youth in the coming months. So I'd love to see in the chat any ideas you have or curriculums you know of. I just put a couple up there on the slide. Now the Grow NYC Food Justice Curriculum. The National Wildlife Federation has a pollinator curriculum called Grow Wild NYC. I've heard of one called Green Beets. There's many out there. So if you have suggestions you know of, good, I see one, put it out there so we're sure to take a look at it. And lastly, about getting in that mental space and being on the same page with youth and adults, ask the youth what they're hoping to get out of their experience. And ask returning youth, if this is the second or third year you've done the program, what worked well and what they'd like to see improve. They are your biggest ambassadors and a resource for your program. And of course, another thing you can do is attending workshops like this one. I see someone say they're an alum, yay. All right, chat. I'm going to turn it over to Maureen now to walk through another exercise that has been really useful in doing right from the get-go when you have a new group in your garden.
Great, thank you, Lila. So I'm so glad that we took the time to think about helping youth get better connected with the garden space and to understand just how these gardens that they're volunteering in work. Just as important as that is spending some time getting to know one another. So a great way to do that is to use the personal inventory. And I'm wondering if, Jamika, if you were part of a YLC, perhaps you even experienced this. And so the way the personal inventory works is that we focus on interests, skills and talents, and areas for growth. So interests are things that we really like to think about. I will say I love to think about baseball to, I could lose some of our New Yorkers here, but I am a Mets fan. So I like to think about baseball, but I would not call anything close to baseball a skill or a talent for me. So that's my quick way of distinguishing those two. And then growth is really just areas for growth. How do we want to improve? I'm always saying I want to improve when it comes to being on time. I always think I can do 3 more things and then I'll be ready to go. So that would be something that I would use as an example. So if we move to the next slide, that will just give us a sense of how this process works. We're going to focus on interests, skills, and talents and areas for growth. And what we do is we would put people into pairs and have them interview each other. So this gets at, remember before we were saying, just it's so important to think about skills development here. So we're going to focus on interviewing skills. And we know this is incredibly important for youth. We'll have them interview one another for about 2 minutes apiece and try to learn as much as they can through questioning and then follow-up questioning and sharing details. They will learn as much as they can about interests, skills and talents, and areas for growth. So we're really getting at listening and learning about one another. And what you can see here is an example of just a set of posters. And you can see we can represent this, through words, through images. These are some of the things that some of the youth that did this were interested in, were, skilled or talented at, or we're looking to grow in. And so if you do this with your youth, one of the beautiful things about it is that you can take a look at these lists and consider, ooh, do I have some youth in the program who could support me in some of the things that I need? So I'm going to throw this back to Lila to talk a little bit about that.
So one need that was identified was help in the garden keeping track of attendance paperwork. Most youth in high school in New York City have a community service requirement of at least 20 hours in order to graduate, and they need proof of the service that they're doing in the garden and the hours that they're attending. But this has proven for some gardeners to be challenging, understandably. So what you can do is tap into youth's problem-solving skills. Maybe you have someone who's a tech genius or someone who's great at organization and can help figure out what the best user-friendly solution for this problem is. Maybe the answer is a digital spreadsheet or a form that youth can complete right on their phone. Maybe it's simpler to just stick old school to paper files, but make it a collaborative effort. View the youth as your partners in working out these challenges and in making the program a success. I have to say an aside, because I just noticed on the last slide, all the drawings that were there, which is a skill and talent I don't have, which maybe wasn't even spelled out on that slide, but it's something that I observed. So it lends to the fact that sometimes it's difficult to even identify your own talents or skills, and you might need someone else to point out to you, hey, look, you're a natural artist. Look what you just drew. Maybe you didn't even realize you were doing it. Building on the paperwork theme, sorry for that aside, is one participant said they would have liked a way to record hard data about what they did in the garden to put on their resume. So one solution we can do is, when coming up with that paperwork system, is you could incorporate tracking the activities and skills that were gained in each session. And by youth having ownership and access to their own paperwork, they can also realize their progress over time and feel proud of what they're learning. So now that you're in the mindset of thinking about youth as partners with adults in dealing with attendance, think of them as partners as you plan any aspect of the garden's activities, and work together to identify concrete steps where the youth themselves will be exercising leadership. They love the opportunity to be creative and have choice, and it's something that we've just heard so much positive feedback about. So brainstorm with them on concrete projects that you want to undertake in the garden, have them be involved in coming up with the ideas, and also have them plan measurable outcomes for the future, for years to come. Maybe they're just starting to plan a project that's long-term that they won't even be able to fulfill this year. But if you continue working and engaging youth as a consistent part of your gardening, eventually you'll see those outcomes realized. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you might already have projects that your garden group has planned for the coming season without youth participating in the decision process, and that's fine. But youth can still be involved in executing those plans and figuring out how to tackle them. So I've just compiled a list on this slide with some potential projects that gardens have expressed this year that they want to engage youth in. And I invite you to add your ideas in the chat, either projects you've already worked with youth to accomplish or ones that you'd like to engage youth in. For instance, we've heard growing food for the community. Youth can be great at researching assets in your community. Where are food pantries? Where are supported housing, homeless shelters, places that people need food? Where are farmers markets? Other gardens have said they want youth to help them install drip irrigation. So you want to look for those youth that have skills, spatial skills, and can look at a map and look at the garden and figure out how you're going to connect those hoses and what's the best layout. Many gardeners have told me they want to build little free libraries in the garden, which are those little sheds where people can drop off books and then take one and enjoy the garden as a space to relax and read. But besides engaging youth in just constructing the kit, you also want, they can take leadership in promoting it, making sure it's used, going to other spaces outside of the garden to advertise that it's there as a resource, or maybe deciding they're going to have a children's story time event in the garden. Planning events is a great way to engage youth. They can help figure out what type of event meets the gardener's needs and the community needs, whether it's a health fair where they can sample different vegetables grown, or a plant cell fundraiser for the group, or an art day. And lastly, I went a little out of order, but promoting composting beyond composting the weeds and plants in the garden themselves. Some gardens are trying to engage their entire neighborhood in bringing food scraps to their garden, particularly as curbside composting has decreased during the pandemic by the city. So throw more project ideas in the chat, and also share ideas about other topics to explore that are tangential to agriculture and basic carpentry in the garden. Now, you don't have to be an expert yourself in all these topics in order to engage youth in exploring them. Find out what they're interested in, have them do research about a certain topic, have them come back the following meeting and demonstrate what they've learned, share with their peers, be leaders, be wowed with their own knowledge. So some topics that I've heard are food justice and healthy eating, mental well-being, medicinal plants, the garden history, botanical art, climate resiliency and environmental action, and other green jobs and green technology. Now that we're thinking about other topics beyond gardening, but that are very much related to, you want to expand youth's network beyond the garden. Find out what other gardens are doing and what other organizations are doing, so you can inspire them and they can feel connected to a bigger picture and a bigger world. Have them sign up for newsletters from other organizations like Teens for Food Justice, the CUNY Urban Food Policy Initiative, the Botanical Gardens. We have one in almost every borough: Queens, Bronx, Brooklyn, Staten Island. Take youth on field trips to visit other gardens nearby, to urban farms, to parks, to the Bronx River Foodway, to Edgemere Farms if you're in Queens, to Red Hook Community Farm if you're in Brooklyn. One quote we heard was, "The field trip to Red Hook Community Farm was most enjoyable because I got to see and take part in a large composting operation and see an urban farm for the first time. You can also broaden their networks by encouraging them to attend youth summits and conferences and have them do it together in a group. There's many out there. Again, if you know of some, throw them in the chat so we can share them later on as resources for everyone. But I put up there the New York City Youth Climate Summit, which is organized by city government Office of Sustainability. And then a conference I just heard about in another one of these workshops for the first time on Saturday, the Black Farmers and Urban Growers Conference, which has a lot of great YouTube content from their last conference pre-pandemic in 2019 and is welcoming to youth. Speaking about all these topics and conferences leads to a distinction between simply doing community service in the garden and doing what we call service learning. So simply growing food for the community, which isn't simple, I shouldn't say simply, but growing food for the community addresses food insecurity. And this is what we call community service. But learning why there is food insecurity in one of the wealthiest cities of the country, which is one of the wealthiest nations of the world, is getting at service learning. Learning about inequality and the policies that propagate it, as well as the ones that try to address it, is service learning. And then once you have an understanding of that framework and those bigger systems at play, you can start to make change, which is the advocacy and civic action piece. What actions can be taken, what services need to be created, what needs to change. So I'm going to turn it over to Maureen now to talk more about that civic action framework. And unmute yourself, Maureen.
Yes, thank you. So when we think about service learning, there are 5 stages of service learning. We have investigation, preparation, action, reflection, and demonstration. And I think it's really important to take a moment and note this. And thank you so much. The Youth Civic Action Guide, just the link to that was just popped into the chat. So you can start to look at more information on this by accessing that Youth Civic Action Guide. And there you'll find out about these 5 stages. And this is really what distinguishes that community service and service learning, is that we're not just jumping right into action. We're really trying to dig into information about this issue that we're addressing. We're taking time to prepare for the action that we take. And the biggest piece is that reflection piece. We are thinking about, what's my part in all of this? And so when we think about how we take action with all of this information in a YLC and in, I think in youth leadership in general, it's really good to break that action into these 3 categories and think about it this way. So we'll jump to the next slide, which shows policy, practice, and advocacy. So when we are addressing policy, this is where we're looking at, really like the rules that are in place. This is how we do this. When we're looking at practice, this is just the everyday actions that we take without maybe thinking about it. And then lastly, advocacy. I always love advocacy is adding voice to a cause. This is where we're really trying to help people be more informed so they can make better informed, positive choices. So they can make that choice to, take their coffee grounds to the composting space, whatever it might be. This is going to happen based on advocacy. So when we're thinking about taking action, often it's a mix of some of these. It isn't just one, but this is, I think, important for youth to recognize that this is, it's not just jumping right in. It really is being mindful of our actions and recognizing the types of actions that we can take. So to help with that, if we jump to the next slide, we'll see there's action research, this MISO method of action research, MISO like the soup, and MISO stands for media, interview, survey, and observation. What we can ask youth to do is start to research an issue that matters to them. We could stay with hunger in New York City for a moment and have youth research using media. Why does this exist? Why do we have people who don't have access to food? Now they might look at that by, first thing they'll want to do is Google, right? And I'm not anti-Google. I think that can give us a starting point, but that is not the start and end of research. We want youth looking at newspapers, at films, at documentaries, really digging into an exploration when it comes to varied forms of media. We also, one of the best things we can do is encourage youth to interview an expert. And if you have the opportunity to bring an expert to talk about a topic with youth, I'm begging you as a college professor who mostly teaches juniors in college, I am begging you, have that person who the youth are going to interview, have that person supply a resume. And it doesn't have to be super fancy, but just simply giving youth an opportunity to put their eyes on a resume is invaluable. I can tell you when I meet my college juniors and they are starting to put together resumes, they are really, really overwhelmed by the process. If this could be something that they have seen in, several iterations over time, oh yeah, I've seen resumes. We interviewed so-and-so, they brought their resume. I saw a resume when we interviewed this person. It would be huge. It would really be, important for their skills development and to take some of that anxiety off of them. And then of course it helps with just youth being prepared to interview an expert. They start to get a sense of what gives that expert the knowledge on the topic that they're talking about. And you'll really see, I think, some great exchanges. The next part of MISO is survey. This is where you can have youth come up with some questions that they're going to ask of their community to see, hey, how should we construct this little library? Or, what types of food should we be growing if we're going to be donating to this food pantry? I think using a survey can be a really, really powerful tool and a simple tool that youth can use. Sometimes they want to just do it in their phones. I think there are so many different approaches that they can use. You'll see this really inform choices and help strengthen youth's ability to talk about why they're doing what they're doing. And then the final piece of MISO is observation. So youth can observe with a critical eye what's going on around them and how it relates to any issue that they're trying to address. So, as Lila so beautifully pointed out, this goes beyond gardening. It goes beyond that physical labor. They're thinking about big issues when they're involved in the garden. They're looking at how their community interacts. They're looking at hunger. They're thinking about composting, about, how are we treating our environment. So I think you're just simply observing with a keen eye and looking for actions that are related to the topics that they're focused on. They will start to collect really, really important information that can inform their choices. And so Once they've gathered all of this information, then we have youth thinking about some kind of plan of action. What do they want to do? So you don't have to use something as formal as this proposal for action. I want to stress, I don't necessarily picture youth sitting down in the gardens with like paper and pen and writing this whole thing out, but I do think it's worth bringing this to your attention so that you can get a sense of some of the components of the action plan or the proposal for action that you will find in the guide. And once you start to think about these different components, then you can think about, okay, well, how are we going to do this in a user-friendly way? So one of the things I love is sticky notes planning. And here, if you bring just some Post-it notes and a couple of pens, if there's a picnic table or even a wall that you can use, what you start to do is just write down steps, write down tasks, what needs to get done if we are going to be successful at taking action. And what you'll start to see is youth will come up with their Post-its with all these steps. They'll put them on the wall or on a table and they'll start moving them around and, oh, wait, we need to do this in this order. You really start to see, who's going to kind of fill in the blank here. You start to see a plan emerge and you start to see collaboration in this beautiful way. And I find youth just love it because it's so tactile and it's not just, sitting and writing, it's the movement and the teamwork and the discussions that start to come up are really, really fantastic. Once you've started to think through a process, a great thing to do is a plus delta. So the plus delta, plus is easy, right? What's going well? What's positive? So you start to list all the things that are going well. We've got tons of donations of books for our little library, right? But what's something we want to change? Well, we have all these donations, but we really wanted this to be a children's library, and most of the donations are adult books. So what do we want to change? We want to change that flyer. We want to change our call for books and make sure that we're making even more clear who this is for. We might want to change who we reach out to, right? This is about that second category. I really want to stress, it's not about what's going wrong. It's about the changes that you want to make. And I think this presentation as a whole is a really fantastic example of that, right? What did we take away from these surveys and what are changes? What are steps that we are recommending? Okay. And then we come to progress monitoring. This is not in the guide yet, but it will be soon and we can make sure that it gets out to you. So the idea here is for youth to say, how are we doing, right? To set some short-term goals within their action plan and to check in on how they're doing over time. They're going to think about, what does success look like? If we want to have, I'm going to stick with that little library example, right? Success looks like, not only having books, but having people take the books, right? So you might put something like that down on the page and here's how we're going to check in with this, and the dates that we're going to check in with this. So if we go to the next slide, it will just serve as a reminder that what we're really talking about here comes down to that preparation for taking action, right? We're thinking about how can we make really informed, really intentional decisions about the ways that we take action. Another piece that you'll see is super important within this service learning framework is reflection. You see it a bunch of times because we're reflecting as we move among each of the different stages. So let's pause and think about reflection. I really love this quote. This is my favorite quote to just sum up reflection. Margaret Fairless Barber says that reflection is to look backward for a while, to refresh the eye, to restore it, and to render it the more fit for its prime function of looking forward. We look back so we can look forward. I just think that sums it all up beautifully. So how do we do that? how do we look back with youth as we're in our gardens? One thing we can do is just a 4-square reflection. This is in the guide, so I apologize. I don't think there's a page there, but you can find it, I promise. And with a 4-square reflection, you've got different questions here for youth to think about, right? What happened? How do I feel? Any ideas? And then finally, any questions? And these categories, these can change. You know, youth may just, if you have a piece of paper you want to do this on, if you just have almost like a graffiti wall. Oh, it is, thank you. It's on page 77, thank you. Youth can take the time to come up with their own categories. What's going to work best for them? This is just a great way to get at not only the kind of the facts of the day, but also then get into the feelings and the ideas that are all bubbling up. Another suggestion for reflection is a spoken word poem. This is super fun, and it's just a fantastic product with I don't want to say not a lot of effort, but the effort is so fun that they don't feel like they're making a huge effort. So what we have here is youth gather around a piece of easel paper. They silently draw as they think about whatever they've just experienced. And then after a few minutes, they write 3 words anywhere on the page and create a collective spoken word poem with each contributor using at least 2 found words. It's beautiful, it's powerful. It's definitely something, could be something that even gets displayed in the garden. More ways to reflect. We've got a feelings line, super easy. You can use this, and believe me, any age. You're probably looking at this and wondering, maybe thinking about where you fall on a feelings line like this. You can create that imaginary line and have people stand on that line in your garden and say, where are you? From, frustrated to happy, where do you stand right now? And then engage in some conversation about why those feelings are bubbling up. Just a couple more. We could do a musical response, right? After maybe a challenging moment or a really exciting, wonderful moment, ask everyone to think about a song that connects or resonates with them when they're thinking about what just happened. I did this recently with my own college class, and it was fantastic because it just makes my heart like melt a little thinking about it. One of my students later in the day emailed the whole class and sent us a playlist that she made based on the lyrics that each person had shared. She actually went and found all the songs. So it really can blossom into something wonderful. And, we're talking that auditory approach with the music connection, but then we want that visual approach too. So you could do something similar to this using photos. Most youth have an iPhone, have a fabulous, or a phone, whatever you prefer. And most of them have a fantastic camera in their devices. So just asking them to think about, hey, take a picture that represents what this day meant to you. Last thing I want to mention is the importance of just giving youth a moment to write, whether it's on paper or jotting down a couple of notes in their phones. Really, really important to let youth gather their thoughts themselves before you ask them to share. The reason I want to stress that is sometimes, if one person says, oh, geez, that weeding was really awful, then everyone just jumps right on board with that. If you give everyone a moment to really gather their own unique and individual responses and reflections on the day, I think you'll have more variety and you'll have more depth. So with all of that in mind, what I want to do is I'll toss this back to Lila, and we're going to think about, especially with reflection, one of the beautiful things that can happen, going back to my weeding example for a moment there, is that we can see youth maybe spinning things or looking at things through a different angle when they take that time to reflect. So something like, hey, that weeding was so awful, but I see the value in it. That can start to help them recognize some of the skills they're developing too. Like, oh, now I have a little bit more perspective, or I have a little bit more patience when I know that my work is headed in this direction. So I think that leads nicely into thinking about job connections.
Exactly. Am I muted? Yes. Okay. So reflection at the end of each service day or activity is a great place to identify those skills, self-identify them, also identify them in each other, what they've observed in their peers, and connect those skills of perseverance, of patience, teaching and explaining what one person showed them to another person, are employment skills, and stress the connection and the applicability of what they're learning in the garden to other places. I'm not sure if I said already, any interview I've ever walked into, I've been asked, tell me about a challenge you've faced and what you've done to overcome it. And if that isn't keeping plants alive, I don't know what is. But youth may need help in seeing those connections between what they're doing in the garden and what they're going to be facing in any job that they undertake. One piece of feedback we heard was they'd like to attend more workshops focused on green jobs and technology. And at GreenThumb, along with the workshops team, we're hoping to put something like that together later in the season, but also encourage youth to research and attend those conferences and those networking events that already exist in New York City. With some effort, they can be found and attended. So encourage that. And now back to Maureen to delve a little deeper into what some of those job skills are that employers are looking for.
Yes. So I would just recommend, if you're trying to think about how to help youth make these connections, there's a really great resource that I would recommend using, and that is this report from the World Economic Forum. I don't think you need to go and read this report. Let me be very clear. If you're watching right now, want to take a screenshot of this slide or take your phone and take a picture of it, I think that would do the trick. But what I think is beneficial is having youth take a look at some of these skills and having them think about how they are developing or cultivating these skills during the time that they're working in the garden, working with others. Certainly, as you look at this list, I hope that there are some that are jumping out at you and you're thinking, oh yeah, I definitely see youth doing this when we're working together. So we've really looked at several of the stages of service learning, and I want to make sure that we hit each and every one. So we've talked about investigation, investigating the garden, learning more about the garden and the community, investigating ourselves, learning more about each other through personal inventory, thinking about issues that matter to us and investigating those issues further, and then preparing to take action, and yes, taking that action. So we've got this investigation, preparation, action. We've talked about reflection. We have yet to talk about demonstration. So I want to take a moment and bring us into thinking about demonstration. This is quite simply where we get to share what we've learned, how we've learned it, what happened, and hopefully to get others on board supporting what we're doing. demonstration can happen in person. It can happen through social media. There are so many ways that we see, especially in the past few years, that we see youth really showcasing their experiences and showcasing what they care about. So I'm going to toss this to Lila for a sec to talk demonstration.
Yes, teenagers always have their phones on them, so be sure they are taking pictures constantly before and after of the planting projects, of the building projects, and promote that work online. Now, very few community gardens have a social media presence, and that's fine. But if it's something you decide that would be useful for the garden, youth can certainly help you create that presence, promote your events, and create content. But even if that's not something that you want, share whatever content they create with Green Thumb. We will post it on our social media. We will tag the name of your garden, and we will make a youth tag too, so that groups all across the city can easily see on Green Thumb's website and Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, what other youth are doing across the city and what a great impact they're making. Another thing that can be documented is, we touched upon, there might be interest in interviewing gardeners about the history of the space. And that oral history project could be turned into something that can also be shared and celebrated online. Community events naturally lend itself to documentation, both in terms of using the internet to promote the upcoming event, as well as to reflect on what happened at the event. It's also a great opportunity for youth to show those leadership skills in taking community members on tours of the garden. And you might want to ask permission if those tours can be videotaped. Taped, I use the word. That dated me. Videoed and posted online. So there's plenty of opportunity for creating demonstration content.
Great. And though we know youth can be fantastic with social media and with, the different approaches that Lila was just describing, when it comes to those in-person approaches, youth may need a little support. They may need some help thinking through how to succinctly and clearly talk about their experience, or maybe make an ask, right? If they're making an ask for an interview, if they are maybe asking for people to come to their event, they want to have a clear plan of how to do this, and they need some time to rehearse. So this is a part of that Civic Action Guide. You can find the elevator pitch. This is where youth can imagine they're in an elevator and just ran into someone who they want to invite to that event or ask to join their gardening group. How would they do this? How would they do this clearly, powerfully, and succinctly in the time that they have? So I definitely recommend checking out that elevator pitch, helping you think through how they can share their experiences and ask others to join. So I know we've talked a lot about the guide, and I'm so glad. I will also say that you do have access to a YouTube channel that has even more in-depth overviews of some of the approaches that we described this evening, and some approaches that we didn't even get to yet. So I would strongly encourage you, if there's something you're thinking, oh, I want to try blank with youth, take a look at this YouTube channel. You may find some really great ideas here. And I know the guide, thank you, because it's been dropped into the chat several times. So thank you. You can access this and hopefully it will become a really great resource for all of you.
Thank you everyone for sticking with us. I know it was a lot of information and talking. I hope you found it to be helpful and inspiring rather than overwhelming. And I loved seeing in the chat all the great ideas that you were sharing. This whole process has been a learning process for me as well, particularly the reflection pieces and the grounding pieces, what I call the touchy-feely stuff. Thinking about what you're doing with intention is not my nature at all, or my strong suit. I definitely dive into action blindly. So it's been a great and useful learning experience for me personally. And I'll end by reiterating these quotes that show gardeners and youth's gratitude for the experience of getting to work together. The youth said, "I was impressed by how helpful the people at the garden were at teaching us, at telling us what to do. We were also given a lot of space for creativity, which also made it a more fun experience." And the gardener said, most importantly, youth have learned through gardening how much of an impact they can make as leaders within their peer group and on the environment. So I will open it up now to question and answer. I know it's getting late, but if there's anything that we don't get to address together on Zoom right now, we can continue the conversation over on Slack. That app has a channel that's been created called the Youth Engagement Channel that you'll find just when you sign in to GreenThumb GrowTogether Slack. And of course, if you're not sure where to start or who to turn to, your GreenThumb outreach coordinator knows your neighborhood best as anybody on GreenThumb staff does, but you are also welcome to reach out to me directly. I put my email there, Lila Elman. And if you're somehow joining us without being affiliated with a garden, you're a youth who wants to get involved, or maybe you're a teacher at a school, you don't know who to ask, and my position may not be around forever, you can call GreenThumb's direct line or write to their GreenThumb info email address, which is checked and responded to regularly to get pointed in the right direction. So I'm going to ask now, Elena, if we have any questions, comments, chats.
Thank you both so much for a very wonderful presentation, lots of information. Just to let everyone know, in case you didn't see it in the chat, this is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. So for questions, you touched on it briefly before, but about involving the youth, adults, and texting youth, like what apps are good for texting youth in a group chat. Do you have any recommendations on that, and also any tips on how to go about that, like working with the parents of the youth?
Sure. I mean, and I did see some specific apps named like GroupMe and WhatsApp. I think as far as what to use, it's going to be helpful to have that discussion again in partnership with the youth you're working with to figure out what everybody likes and sees. And if you're not comfortable with using an app, the youth can teach you. You know, I recently just got on Discord because that's the only way my stepson will respond to me. So, but as far as looping in the parents, often, especially when working with minors and having them come to the garden, you'll need parental consent or some sort of waiver sign, something from the school. So I personally, you know, always ask them to share, you know, point of contact with their parents, a phone or email, or even invite them to come to the first day that they're in the garden to meet you and talk about it, but that might not be possible. I also turn it back to the chat to see if anyone else amongst us has ideas to lend. Let me see.
Someone did mention asking about specific paperwork, which you mentioned a waiver. Do you have examples of that, or how do you go about? Do you recommend doing that the first day?
Absolutely. Yeah, GreenThumb does have a template. So I'll be sure to include that. We're going to send an email in about a week at the close of the conference to everyone that was here, again, sharing those resources. So I'll make a note to add the language that could be adapted that GreenThumb uses. But certainly, I mean, it doesn't have to be, you know, a specific form. It can be as simple as, this is who to contact in case of emergency. I'm a parent of so-and-so, give my consent for them to work in your garden, to volunteer in the garden. So it doesn't, you know, it's not like a city or a state form, just something to have in writing.
Thank you. If anyone has any other questions, please drop it in the chat.
And I see I was asked specifically about taking trips, the paperwork. So it is good to decide or include, when you have a parent sign that consent form, to include whether you're writing just for consent for them to be in the garden, or additionally for taking trips to visit other places. And if you need to do consent for individual trips because you haven't planned them out yet, so be it. Or you could just, you know, make a blanket form and say including trips, you know, in the New York City metro area, something vague like that. It's also a wise idea to include a clause about a waiver for taking photos and videos. We call it a media consent. So you could add another sentence in there, or checkbox, I do or do not consent to sharing my image online, because some families are more private and protective about that too. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And I can't wait for the gardening season to kick off and to get to see a lot of you in person and see what we create together.